Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Breaking Brews Podcast, a podcast focused on the business side of beer and what's driving today's thriving craft beer industry. Whether you're one of the thousands of people making craft beer what it is today, or just love great beer and want to know more about it, this show is here to cover everything from sales, marketing, branding, culture, and much, much more. The Breaking Brews Podcast delivers real-life scenarios and experiences from industry professionals that will help your beer knowledge evolve. To tap into more great beer content, visit breakingbrews.com today. And now, the moment you've been waiting for. Let's get this session started. All right, boys and girls, welcome back to the Breaking Brews Podcast. I am your host, Jason Cercone, and you are tuned in for session 27 of The Word of the Poured. If you haven't done so already, jump back in the archives and check out the first 26 episodes of the Breaking Brews Podcast. They are ready and waiting for you. If you like what you hear, jump over to iTunes, drop a rating, drop a review. Let me know how I'm doing with the show, and help the Breaking Brews Podcast reach the ears of more thirsty beer professionals and beer enthusiasts just like you. You can subscribe to the Breaking Brews Podcast at Stitcher, at iTunes, at Google Play Music, and on Spotify. And you can stay up to date with show notes and everything you need to know about the Breaking Brews Podcast over at breakingbrews.com/podcast. Also, join the Breaking Brews Podcast Central Facebook group. There's going to be a lot happening with that group as the first season of the podcast comes to a conclusion in a few short weeks. So we'll keep the party going on Facebook. Come and join the crowd. All right, kids, session 27 of the podcast lies ahead of us today, and I am joined by Mr. Trey Bowden, who is an IT professional. He runs his own company dedicated to information technology. He used to work with Dogfish Head. He worked for them for over a decade and just recently broke out on his own. Today we're going to talk about a subject that doesn't necessarily get a lot of discussion, but it is a vital element to running a successful business. I can remember past jobs where I oftentimes had to rely on my IT department to help me out of many a jam when it came to different aspects of technology, be it scheduling, be it something to do with the computers, you name it. They were always there. They were always willing to help. And having a good infrastructure when it comes to your information technology backbone is going to be a critical element to your business. Now, if you're in the beginning stages of getting your business started, it's something you're going to want to look at immediately, as Trey will explain today. If your business is up and running and established, it's still important to pay attention to the IT infrastructure built within your business. So we're going to dive into that today, and we're also going to talk about Trey's time at Dogfish Head, arguably one of the most world-renowned breweries out there today. So that's going to do it for me. I'm going to step aside and let you guys dig into session 27 of the Breaking Brews Podcast with Trey Bowden covering information technologies. All right, boys and girls, it is that time again. It is podcast time. It is the Breaking Brews Podcast. As always, I am your host, Jason Cercone. Today, I am joined by Mr. Trey Bowden. Trey, what's up, my friend?
How you doing, sir?
I'm good. So today we are going to dive into an element of your business, if you are a brewery owner, that you may not think about every day, but there's definitely some value in it, and you want to put it front of mind because it's going to help with a lot of different aspects of the overall growth and development of your business. And Trey is the expert that is going to lead the way on information technology, or IT, if you're into the whole brevity thing. We're going to learn a lot from Trey today, and I know I'm going to learn a lot myself. This isn't necessarily an aspect that I spend a ton of time on, but I'm very anxious to learn what Trey has to offer us and have some good conversations about why this is so beneficial to the brewery business that's out there for everybody. Trey, before we get rocking and rolling here, why don't you give us some background on yourself?
I spent the last 20 years in information technology in both IT services and manufacturing. I got started at Purdue Farms. And the great thing about that was the access to enterprise software and technology, where we kind of supported the Delmarva operation from Milford, Delaware, all the way down to Accomack, Virginia. So got a good base experience early on. And then that kind of led me to another poultry company, and then eventually a web services company that then finally got me into the beverage industry, because at the time, Dogfish Head was one of our handful of clients at that web technology company. And being my background with IT infrastructure and such, they started to need more of the IT services and support. So ultimately, one day a week led to 2 days a week to ultimately coming on board full time after a couple of years. And so, yeah, that's how I kind of got into the beverage industry back in 2009.
So you were working with Dogfish Head for close to a decade then, huh?
Correct. Yep.
Excellent.
I worked through till February of 2019.
What were some of the responsibilities that you took on when you started working directly with them?
Essentially all of the IT infrastructure. So when you think about all of the networking, the servers, the telephony, at the time it was just the brewery and the restaurant in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. But over time that grew to have an inn in Lewis, Delaware, as well as the expanded distillery in Milton, and a second restaurant down in Rehoboth as well.
And then recently you struck out on your own.
I did. I
So,
did.
so what is the entrepreneurial path brought to you so far?
The company is called Goodbetterbest Technologies, and essentially it's really focusing on providing better technology direction for the small, medium-sized business, especially craft beverage business.
So when you started up your company, did you have some clients lined up or did you start everything fresh from the ground up?
I just started fresh from the ground up.
How many companies are you working with now?
Just a handful right now. I've spent the last few months really building out my processes. I'm a pretty analytical guy, so I definitely want to make sure that the process are mostly rock solid before I really start marketing out my services.
Sure. Do you work with anybody else or is it just you working solo?
It's just me, myself, and I at this time.
I know the feeling. That could be fun though. That could be
It
rewarding.
is. It is.
So let's talk about the overall IT infrastructure for breweries. So again, not necessarily a subject that we've tackled here on the show, so I'm looking forward to digging into this a little deeper. So Trey, from your experience and from your opinions and everything that you've gathered through all of your years in the IT business, what are some of the most important factors that breweries and businesses of all shapes and sizes, for that matter, should be aware of when it comes to the IT backbone and IT infrastructure of their business?
So first off, I guess typically I would find that an owner wants to know what are the risks with their information technology, where are they at with their information infrastructure, how can life be made easier, and how can they save money. I mean, ultimately, IT is meant to be business enhancing. It's not just a necessary evil. You certainly want to focus on that beer development and the hospitality side of the business to get more customers in the door and make amazing brews. But you do need a good tool set and infrastructure to support that growing operation. You certainly want solid processes and informed staff around those tools for the ultimate company to succeed.
So, to what degree do you include your staff as a brewery owner, brewery management in this whole IT infrastructure? What parts of it are valuable to them, and how can it help them succeed in what they do on a day-to-day basis?
I would say that yes, you definitely want to include your staff in decisions around technology. I mean, it depends on what it is. So, for instance, if you're just talking about base like infrastructure just to run the backbone of the company, when you think about internet links and wireless, yeah, you're not probably involving a ton of the staff in those types of basic decisions. But when it comes around more user interface type stuff with point of sale and other hospitality type technology, you want to involve the team around some of those decisions just to gain some good feedback. I mean, lean on obviously your lead positions to help drive the conversation and some more of the decisions around that, but get the feedback from the bulk of the team, because too often teams will implement tools and there's a certain level of frustration because they were never involved in any of the decision making, and how are they going to provide great guest experience if they're frustrated with the tools that are supposed to make their lives easier.
Right. And I would have to think from the server aspect, they often come to you with experience from other restaurants, other bars, other breweries, and they may have worked with a certain POS system that worked really well for them in the business or the company they were working for. It could be something that if a company was looking to make a switch, they could make suggestions if they're available to give that feedback.
Exactly. I mean, technology will change over time. You shouldn't be afraid to scrap some system to get something better. I mean, that's kind of where the whole name of Good, Better, Best Technologies came out with. It's okay just to implement good. You certainly don't need the Rolls Royce of technology in all cases, but you definitely want to have a well documented system and make sure that tool, that technology, is truly business enhancing.
From the brewery ownership perspective, and I think about the owners that I work with on a daily basis, I know one of the big things that they're looking for is making life easier because they have a lot of different hats that they need to wear and they have to fulfill a lot of different responsibilities through their day-to-day operations. So what are some of the ways that what you do and ultimately what a sound IT infrastructure can do to make an owner and manager's life easier day to day?
So I think you certainly want to minimize any breakdown of your backbone, your network infrastructure. So making sure that the network and the wireless is quality. And quality doesn't mean, again, the Rolls Royce of technology, but it just means quality technology to make sure that your internet link is maintained. You possibly have a backup provider to make sure that your connectivity for in this era of cloud-based point of sales, that they'll stay up and working. So, I mean, that I would say that's a good first step. A second thing, obviously, is having a pretty sweet point of sale system to really make sure that the hospitality side of the business is stable and is both a great experience for both the staff as well as the guest. So there's two key areas for sure. More on the accounting side, obviously the whether it's QuickBooks or other types of accounting software. QuickBooks tends to be one of the typical ones for small, medium business. You certainly want to make sure that the accounting flows, the workflows are just fast and working and efficient. And that way, because when you think about money coming in the door and going out, you want to make sure that you've got a good eye on data there so that you can make faster business decisions. And I mean, that's just for overall general any good business, let alone when you think about the beverage industry specifically. Once you get to a certain size, spreadsheets and such, they don't really tend to scale very well. And that's where you want to start looking more into like brewery production management software, whether it's like something like the Fifth Ingredient or Ecos or Orchestrated Beer. There's a handful of them out there that are great like first steps towards that world.
Let's take this down to brass tacks. Basic. I'm just starting my brewery. Let's say I'm building out a space or renovating a space, whatever the case may be, because there's a lot of folks that are in this area right now. What would be step one of building the IT infrastructure, and when would you recommend doing that for a brand new startup brewery?
I would say pretty much immediately. You certainly want to understand the business model first. If you're just a brew pub, and that's where you want to maintain just having one brew pub, that model would be very different than saying, all right, well, we know for sure we're going to be a production brewery within 2 years' time at a large scale at X amount of barrelage per year. I mean, I know things change and ambitions might be greater and greater as a business, a craft brewery sees more success. But ultimately, I think it comes down to what is your business model? And that way you can decide on how much technology you need to invest in those key areas to grow. Because if you've got dreams of being a multi-site production brewery early on, that level of investment is going to be very different than just a single site location.
Have you encountered, and this may be a hard question for you to answer, just being relatively new to getting your personal business off the ground, but maybe from your past experience, have you encountered any types of businesses like they're in similar arenas, like two different breweries, for example, but they're similar size, but they're doing things differently operational wise with IT. Have you come across anything like that?
I don't know if there really is one standard plan. In fact, that's kind of why I'm very excited about offering these types of services, because I feel there's an opportunity to provide better technology direction in this space. I'm not saying I've got all the answers. I certainly don't, but I do have a good base of experience that I truly want to be able to help the growing breweries. Ultimately, it comes down to just having a good base of documentation. I mean, whether it's craft beer or any business, I do typically find though that there's a lack of documentation around what they have. And on top of that, lots of business owners have been burned by IT professionals because it tends to be very transactional in nature. There's no real authenticity or relationship there. And it is a true partnership that you need to be able to succeed and to build that trust. And even you can be the most progressive company out there, but if you don't trust the people kind of like offering solutions, I can suggest as the best well laid out plan ever, but if I don't have trust in them, they're not going to want to pull the trigger and move forward. So I think it really comes down to building that trust, organizing your IT through better documentation. If as opposed to a up and coming, hey, we're about ready to create something. If you're already established, you do want to understand what you have now. You certainly don't want to just like throw it all out the window. There could be a good level of investment on what you currently have. Maybe it just needs to be organized, but you'll never be able to come up with a plan of making it better, improving it, until you understand what you have.
I would assume that most small breweries are partnering with a business just like yours. Am I correct in that assumption? Like most of them are going to have someone in-house that's handling this full time.
I would say there's a mix. There's usually, yeah, they're partnering with some level local technology company from time to time, or maybe some regional players that are in the tech space, or they've kind of designated someone that's halfway decent with computers to kind of maintain the day to day, which gets you by. But
Right.
ultimately, when it is time and if you have ambitions to scale, it's going to be harder to scale if it's kind of not very well documented.
So your recommendation would be to start on the right foot, make the investment early so you're set up to scale, and if you have ambitions to grow and you know you're going to want to make this business larger as time goes on, that you are set up properly from the very start.
Yes.
Well, let's segue into your approach. Now, first thing I want to ask is we've got listeners to this podcast all over the place, all over the country. Are you able to work remotely? I know you're in Delaware. Could you work with somebody in California?
Yes, and that is my goal, to be able to provide services remotely. I mean, I love to travel, and I'm certainly willing to travel, but I feel like the bulk of my work can be completed remotely.
Well,
And then
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, as far as more of the approach to helping clients out and such, is three key areas. So I call it the COG approach. I'm a big into steampunk. One of the things we had at Dogfish Head Brewery Distillery was the steampunk treehouse, and that's kind of what really got me really into that. And so that's where I created the COG approach from that. And essentially that is COG. So C for create a roadmap, O for organize your IT, and G for grow the business. So yeah, you got to start out with creating a roadmap, and that goes back to trying to understand, gain insight into what that business model is first, so that you can create a roadmap to get you to the next level to support your business. O for organize your IT, because ultimately you want to either start off with a good, organized, simple technology stack, or you want to try to simplify it down because there could be some level of technology sprawl that you have right now where you've got maybe 5 different tool sets that are kind of doing the same thing, and you want to certainly try to get that down to 1 or 2 tools. And that's what will provide that return on investment in your tech. And then ultimately, again, growing the business, it really comes down to committing to that solid technology plan. Because, the name of the game is still, you want to provide great craft beer and such, but to do that, you want to have a competitive advantage, and better technology tools will help with that mission.
I think that as breweries are developing that initial plan and that initial framework of what they want their business to be, I see this as being a very important aspect to consider. I'm sure to some degree it has to be considered from the POS standpoint and from all standpoints for that matter. But the whole COG approach that you've developed, I think, could fit very well into the overall approach that all breweries are taking when they get their business started, or even breweries that are already established. You might be evaluating some things that you feel you can do differently. I think going back to basics and taking a look at the roadmap that you created could answer some questions. Are you on the right path? Are there some things that we could be doing differently and better? And I think that's where it could become extremely valuable to reach out to someone like you to get that information right from you, Trey, and then run with it and make sure you're doing it the proper way.
Yeah, I always want to make sure that with this business, this approach, that my deliverables to said companies they could walk away with that and use that to gain. I mean, obviously, I want to maintain that relationship, that partnership with anyone, but I never want to put someone in a bad way, a bad place, and that goes back to how important I believe in documentation is how often technology professionals will do a job, but they don't ever put the business owner in a good place because it's just not documented. And so for teams change and such, and how much of a challenge that can be to pick up that project like years later when there's no documentation around it. And ultimately with IT in general too, like I also really believe in being data informed, not data driven. I mean, all these tools are just meant to enhance the business. Like, technology is not going to solve all your challenges, but it can certainly help grease the wheels if it's used properly.
I think the whole documenting process can be appreciated by anybody in the brewing industry because they are constantly documenting their recipes to make sure that the beers are turning out properly, where they can make tweaks for the next time they brew that batch. So I think those go hand in hand.
Oh, of course. Whether it's the recipes or SOPs or, just general, which kind of have the safety practices. Obviously,
right.
There's a lot of potential dangers in the brewing world, and you want to be safety minded.
Yeah, that's one thing. The brewing industry does look glamorous on the surface, but I know a lot of folks say it's industrial work, and there is a lot of hazards in their day-to-day operations. The potential acid burn is not something that you potentially hear about as a consumer, but it's important to know it's a factor in these guys' lives. All right, guys, now we know keeping your beer fridge stocked should be a top priority. And stocking those shelves with a variety of great craft beer is easy when you grab your bottles and cans from Hal's Bottle Shop. Located on Babcock Boulevard in Ross Township, Hal's offers beers on draft for in-house consumption, plus a huge variety of bottles and cans from local, regional, and national breweries to go. Are you into rare, hard-to-find beers? Hal's has got you covered. Join the Hal's Rare Beer Club and earn points for every rare beer you pick up. The more points you earn, the more rare beer you get access to. Check out Hal's Bottle Shop every Thursday from 7 to 9 p.m. for special events and rare beer tappings with your favorite craft breweries, and like Hal's Bottle Shop's Facebook page for new releases, event postings, and much more. This is all great stuff, Trey. Let's take some time to tie it back to some of those years you spent at Dogfish Head. So clearly you learned a lot, and that experience has allowed you to strike out on your own and get your own business started. But what were some of the good experiences that you had while you were working at Dogfish Head?
One of the awesomest opportunities, I guess, was just being part of the small batch brewing program where you would pick 3 other coworkers and get to brew a beer on the Sabco brewing system, which was the same brewing system that Sam got started on back in '95. Actually got to be part of the very first one, I think maybe 2011 era, where we brewed a strawberry rhubarb beer. So that
Awesome.
was pretty awesome. Did a Black Hole IPA and a second runnings beer with that with the grain. And then finally, we made a beer called Mr. Hector Vargas Ale. And the neat thing about that is not only did we win for the quarter, but we also won for the year. So that was a pretty neat. The grand prize for that year was we got to go up to the Italy restaurant in New York City and kind of all expense paid trip up there with my 3 friends and do that. And on top of that, that recipe was one that got featured in the Project Extreme Brewing new revised edition a couple of years back.
Did you choose who you worked with on those beers, or did they choose the teams at random?
We did get to choose.
So going into that, did you have any prior brewing experience?
No,
So
first time.
First time. Nice work.
Yeah.
What was your contribution to the whole project?
Some of the marketing, like, and kind of going back to the small batch brew, like, obviously we needed a system at the time to kind of manage that process. So I was the one that originally created that little kind of mini internal website and workflow automation to get your recipe approved by the brewmasters at the time and to kind of come up with your list of ingredients and all of that process. So we helped kind of create that. But then on the actual brews themselves, I would, obviously not being the brewing professional per se, I was more of the manual labor for a lot of that and maybe some of the marketing around some of the names and such. But yeah, it was an awesome time.
That's typically what ends up happening to us guys that do collaboration beers but don't necessarily have brewing experience. We're doing the grunt work. I know
Exactly.
several of the beers that I've helped breweries with, I was cleaning out the tanks or doing something from the sanitation end. But hey, that's just as big of a part of it as anything else. So I definitely don't take that lightly.
No, it was a great time. I look forward to doing more. In fact, and besides beer, like, I've gotten into some other fermentation projects at home. I just recently on Saturday made my first batch of beer infused soap.
How'd that turn out?
Yeah, pretty well. I mean, similar to how someone would get started making an all malt extract beer, like, I kind of did the cheating route and started with a good soap base that was kind of had some honey and some other stuff in it. But I found some high octane, 8 o'clock, I think is the brand name, but they're high octane, high caffeine coffee. And then I took the Amort ale, one of which I had been aging, reduced that down and kind of mixed it all together. And a day later, I had some cool bars of soap.
That's one of the things, like, this has been talked about here on the podcast many times, but how beer has spawned all of these other ideas for products, and we've seen beer-based foods and beer-based shampoos, beer-based soap. It's so cool to see how this one liquid has inspired all of these innovations.
Yeah, and as far as innovations, there was always a ton of other cool projects through the years, and one other in particular that I was pretty proud of to work with my dad on. So my dad retired from the Bell Atlantic Phone Company after 45 years. So I grew up with a lot of telephony technology and all types of telephones around the house, and in fact, it's kind of turned into his own. It's one of the only, I think, telephone museums on the East Coast. So Dogfish has a steampunk treehouse, and it was built by an art collective called 5 Ton Crane out of California, and they built it for the Burning Man Festival and put it up a couple times at that and maybe a few other destinations, but ultimately it became the property of Dogfish Head. And so when we first put that in, I think it was 2010, 2011 era, I figured, well, if you got a steampunk treehouse, you need a steampunk phone. So my dad and I kind of built this analog to digital kind of phone where we took an old, I don't think maybe 1910 era like wooden box and modified the crank mechanism. Instead of cranking that to ring the bell, essentially, we actually have that cranking so it provides enough voltage to light up a light. This kind of cool one, and there's cool Edison light bulbs
Okay.
at the top, and kind of added some other gauges and such that just make it look all steampunky. But the neatest part, though, was we actually made it functional. So we were able to use analog to digital converter just to get the signal into a digital format. And then we hooked it up to a voice over IP adapter that then hooked into the phone system at the brewery at the time as another extension. And so you could actually make phone calls back and forth from that phone. So it was pretty awesome project.
That's really cool. Now, I got to ask, because my memory is not serving me. I know that Dogfish Head was featured on the show Brewmasters, which unfortunately did not get to stay on the air as long as it should have, because it was a great show. And if I'm recalling, I believe it was Big Beer Influence basically saying that it had to come off the air. Was there an episode that talked about the steampunk treehouse and the different features that were found within it?
Yes.
Was
that definitely
feature?
was at that episode? Probably not, because I think I added it after.
There was, in my foggy mind of watching TV from years ago, I knew that there was that was featured. I just couldn't remember all the ins and outs of that particular episode. It's really cool that you guys got to work on that project and made it. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, you for Trey, just you've got your own little. Implement that into an iPhone app, and the world is your oyster.
Could be a plan. Yeah.
Well, let's get ready to wind down here. I'd like to give you an opportunity to tell all of our listeners, for anybody that is operating a brewery now or is in those beginning phases, how can you partner up with them to make sure they get all of their IT infrastructure started on the right foot?
Just reach out to me. It's Trey at goodbetterbest.tech or hello at goodbetterbest.tech. And I'd love to chat with anyone if you have any questions or concerns around your IT and your growing business or startup business. I would be glad to see if I could help you.
Awesome. I will include all of Trey's contact information that he just shared in the show notes. So if you want an easy clickable link, you can do that as well. And what's a good website that people can jump over to learn more about what you do?
And that is goodbetterbest.tech. TECH.
All right. Trey, thanks a lot for taking some time to drop some knowledge on us today and some good stuff. I hope everybody was able to gain some value from it. And if you'd like to learn more, you can reach out to Trey directly.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it.
Have a great one.
You as well, sir.
Okay, guys, that brings session 27 of the Breaking Brews podcast to a conclusion. I'd like to thank Trey Bowden for joining me on the podcast to discuss information technologies and giving you guys an idea of what he does and how he can help your business. So if you are looking for some support in this area, reach out to Trey. I'll include his information in the show notes. He did mention it there at the end of the show as well. So you can reach out to him for some help and hopefully bring him on board to help improve your infrastructure when it comes to information technologies. Trey, once again, thanks for joining us on the show. Hopefully you out there listening in podcast land were able to absorb some great information from Trey today and put it to use in your business. So let's look ahead to session 28 of the Breaking Brews podcast. Season 1 is rapidly reaching the finale. We've got 3 more episodes to go as we round out the first season of the Breaking Brews podcast. In session 28, I'm going to be joined in the studio by Mr. Dominic Sincata, who is the co-founder of Co-Star Brewing in Pittsburgh, PA. Dom has a very rich background, and he's a very smart dude, and this guy got his doctorate, and the dissertation that he wrote was talking about various elements of the beer industry and how they all tie into a regional brand identity. And we're going to dive into that, and ultimately we're going to talk about why having regional synergy within the brewing community is so important. And you see this across the country at multiple breweries with the number of destinations that we have. Dom and I talk about Asheville, North Carolina, Denver, Colorado. Even Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is becoming a big beer tourist destination. And you see this in pockets across the country. One of the big reasons why these areas of the country are such big destinations as a whole is because the breweries work together. We've talked about this many times, how camaraderie the brewing industry is, and developing synergy throughout the region helps establish great brand identity. It helps increase beer tourism, and Dom and I are going to dive into all of that next week on the show. It was a really fun conversation. Dom and I covered a lot of cool shit, and you guys are going to really get a lot to absorb and put to use no matter where you're listening to this podcast. As we've said many times, no matter where you are in the country, the content that you hear on the Breaking Brews podcast is designed to help you and your brand grow. Ultimately, we like to see success stories unfolding throughout the country. And no matter where you are right now, you can take the information we share, put it to work within your business, and ultimately see success. So next week on the Breaking Brews podcast, Dom Cercone is in the studio with yours truly, and we're going to talk about regional synergy and brand identity for breweries across the country within their region. It's going to be a fun talk. Hope you can join me. If you haven't done so already, 26 other episodes of the Breaking Brews podcast are waiting for you in the archives. Today's session 27 is officially in the history books. If you like what you heard today or on any other episode, jump over to iTunes, give me a rating, give me a review. Help me round out the season with some good feedback. Let me know I'm doing well. Let me know where we can improve. Always looking for ways that I can make the Breaking Brews podcast better. Subscribe to the show, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, and Spotify, and join the Breaking Brews Podcast Central Facebook group today. As I said, as season 1 wraps up, we're going to keep the group going strong, and we'll be doing some fun things in there. Join the community today. That is it. Session 27 is officially over and done with. We look forward to Session 28 next week with Dom Cercone. Until then, I am your host, Jason Cercone, for the Breaking Brews Podcast, and this has been The Word of the Port.